The first time someone looks at you like you matter, it feels like a mistake. The rain came down in sharp needles, tapping against my skin like it was trying to wake me up, like it was asking why I was still standing there, soaked through, clutching a tray I wasn't even allowed to carry inside. The neon sign above the VIP entrance flickered red and gold, reflecting off puddles that made the sidewalk look richer than I felt. I checked my reflection in the glass. Foundation too dark, layered thick to hide what I didn't want anyone to see, but the rain had started to betray me, thin streaks cutting through the illusion, exposing the truth underneath. I should have walked away. That's what pride would have done. But pride doesn't pay rent in a one-bedroom apartment that smells like old paint and late notices. So I stepped forward anyway, heels slipping slightly on wet concrete, forcing a smile that felt rehearsed even to me. "Hi," I said, soft, polite, practiced. "I'm here for the late shift." The host barely looked up at first, just enough to scan me, to measure me, to decide. It always happened in that order. Eyes. Pause. Judgment. "We're full," he muttered, like he'd already said it 100 times tonight, like I was just another inconvenience. I swallowed. I was scheduled. I added, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to keep it small. That made him look up fully. Not at my eyes. Not really. At my skin. And there it was. That shift. That quiet, familiar distance. "Yeah," he said slowly, leaning back like the space between us needed to grow. "We don't need extra help tonight." I felt it before I understood it. That subtle push. That invisible line being drawn right in front of me. "I've been on the schedule all week," I said, and I hated how my voice sounded. Too careful, too aware, like I was asking permission to exist. He shrugged, already done with me. Things change. Behind him, laughter spilled out from inside, warm, effortless, expensive. Crystal glasses clinking. Music low and smooth. A world I served but never belonged to. I nodded like I understood, like this was normal, like this didn't sting in that quiet place I tried not to touch. I turned slightly, ready to step back into the rain, back into invisibility, back into the version of myself that didn't make scenes. That's when I heard it. Not loud, not angry, just certain. "Then close the place." The words cut through everything. Clean. Controlled. Final. I froze. So did the host. Slowly, I turned back. He stood just inside the doorway, like he'd always been there, like the room had been built around him. Black suit. Perfect fit. Not flashy, just undeniable. The kind of presence that didn't need volume because it already had attention. His eyes moved once. From the host to me. And stayed there. Not sliding past. Not dismissing. Staying. It felt wrong. I wasn't used to being seen that way. Not like this. The host straightened instantly, his voice changing, tightening. "Mr. Cole, I didn't realize you. You realized enough," he interrupted, calm, almost bored. "You just decided it didn't matter." The air shifted. I could feel it. Like pressure before a storm. People inside had gone quieter, conversations thinning out into whispers that tried to pretend they weren't listening. Sebastian Cole. I didn't need anyone to say his name. I'd heard it before. Everyone had. It carried weight. The kind that made people lower their voices without knowing why. He stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, just deliberate. Every movement measured. The distance between us closed, and I became hyper-aware of everything. My wet clothes, my shaking fingers, the faint sting where the makeup had worn too thin along my wrist. His gaze dropped briefly. Just a second. But it was enough. He saw it. I knew he saw it. My instinct kicked in immediately. I pulled my sleeve down. Too late. His eyes lifted back to mine. And there it was again. That look. Not pity. Not curiosity. Recognition. "Why do you let them?" he asked. No accusation. No softness either. Just a question that landed heavier than it should have. I blinked, caught off guard, my rehearsed answers suddenly useless. I just work here," I said, and even to me, it sounded like an excuse. Like something I'd been saying for a long time. He studied me for a second that felt longer than it was. Then he turned his head slightly, addressing the host without breaking the moment completely. "Everyone leaves." The host hesitated, just for a breath, then nodded quickly. "Of course." The doors opened wider. Conversations inside faltered, then stopped altogether. Chairs scraped softly against polished floors. People stood, confused, curious, obedient. I stood there, frozen, not understanding what was happening, only knowing that something had shifted and I was somehow at the center of it. One by one, they filed out. Expensive coats, controlled smiles, eyes that glanced at me, then away, like I was part of the reason but not something they wanted to acknowledge. Within minutes, the place that had been full of noise and light emptied into silence. Just the low hum of electricity, the soft patter of rain outside. And him. He looked back at me, the space around us now too quiet, too intentional. Come inside, he said. Not a command. Not quite a request either. Something in between. I hesitated, because this felt like stepping into something I didn't understand. Something bigger than a missed shift. Bigger than a rude host. Bigger than me. But my feet moved anyway. Inside, the air was warmer. Drier. It smelled like money and something darker underneath it. I stood near the entrance, unsure where to go, what to do with my hands, my voice, myself. He didn't rush me. Didn't fill the silence. Just watched. And somehow, that was worse. You covered it, he said finally, nodding slightly toward my wrist. I instinctively crossed my arms. It's nothing. A lie. Easy. Automatic. He tilted his head just a fraction. Don't do that. My breath caught. Do what? Lie to me. Not harsh. Just certain. Like he already knew the answer and was waiting to see if I would catch up. I looked away first. Because I always did. Because that was safer. Because being seen felt like standing too close to an edge I wasn't ready to fall from. I don't know what you think you saw, I said quietly. I just came to work. Silence again. Then a small exhale, almost amused. No, he said. You came to survive. That landed somewhere deeper than I expected. I didn't respond. Couldn't. He took one step closer. Not enough to trap me. Just enough to make it impossible to ignore him. Tonight, he said, his voice lower now, we fix this. I frowned, confusion mixing with something else I didn't want to name. Fix what? His eyes didn't leave mine. The part where they thought they could treat you like you don't matter. My heart stuttered, because no one had ever said it out loud before. Not like that. Not where I could hear it. Not where I couldn't pretend it wasn't real. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt exposed. And somehow that was worse. Silence does not feel empty when someone is watching you. It feels heavy. I stood there with my arms crossed, like I could hide behind them, like I could undo what he had already seen, but the room felt different now, smaller somehow, like the walls had moved closer just to keep me inside this moment. He did not rush me. That was the worst part. Most people filled silence with words, excuses, noise. He let it sit. Let it stretch until it forced something out of me. You cannot fix this, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady enough to hold. This is just how it is. His expression did not change. Not surprise. Not disagreement. Just understanding. And somehow that made it worse. No, he said after a beat. It is how you have been told it is. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Same thing. He shook his head once, slow. Not even close. I looked at him then. Really looked, trying to understand why he cared, why any of this mattered to someone like him. Someone who clearly had never stood outside a door and been told they did not belong. You do not know anything about me, I said. You are right, he answered calmly. But I know what I saw. His eyes dropped again, just for a second, to my wrist. I followed his gaze without meaning to, and for the first time, I saw it the way he did. Not something hidden. Not something covered. Something obvious. Something real. I pulled my sleeve tighter. It is nothing, I repeated, softer now, less convincing. He did not argue. He did not push. He just stepped past me, deeper into the empty room, his presence pulling the space with him like gravity. Come here, he said. I hesitated. Because I should have left. Because this was already too much, too personal, too close to something I had spent months pretending did not exist. But my feet moved again, like they had already decided before I could think. He stopped near one of the tables, the white tablecloth still perfectly arranged, glasses untouched, like the night had been paused mid-scene. He picked up a glass, studied it for a moment, then set it back down without drinking. Do you know what they saw when you walked in? He asked. I frowned slightly. Someone they did not want here. No, he said. They saw someone who would not fight them. The words landed sharp. Not cruel. Just accurate in a way I did not want to admit. You think I should have caused a scene? I shot back, a little more edge in my voice now. That would have helped. He looked at me again, that steady, unflinching gaze. No. I think you learned to survive in a way that made you small enough for them to ignore. My chest tightened, because he was not wrong. And I hated that he was not wrong. You do not get it, I said quickly. You walk into a room, and people move out of your way. I walk in, and people pretend I am not there. He took a step closer, closing the distance again, but not crowding me, just enough to make sure I could not hide behind the space between us. Then why are you trying so hard to stay in rooms that do not deserve you? I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. Because the truth was not simple. It was rent. It was bills. It was years of being told to be grateful for any opportunity, even the ones that chipped away at me piece by piece. Because I need this, I said finally. I need the job. I need the money. I do not have the luxury of walking away. He studied me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not softer, but more focused. Like he was recalculating something. How much? He asked. I blinked. What? How much do you make here in a week? I stiffened immediately. That is none of your business. Tonight it is, he said evenly. Because you are standing here soaked, disrespected, and still defending a place that turned you away at the door. Heat rose in my chest, a mix of anger and something else I did not want to name. I am not asking you to fix my life, I said, sharper now. Good. He replied without hesitation. Because I am not offering to. That stopped me. I frowned. Then what are you doing? He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim black card, and placed it on the table between us. Not pushed toward me. Not forced. Just there. I am removing the idea that this is the best you can have. I stared at the card like it might disappear if I blinked. I do not take things from people like you, I said quietly. He tilted his head slightly, almost curious. People like me? I met his eyes, holding the gaze this time. Powerful. Untouchable. The kind of people who think they can walk in and rearrange someone else's life. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a small shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. I do not rearrange lives, he said. I change outcomes. The distinction felt important, even if I could not fully explain why. I shook my head slightly, stepping back. I do not need saving. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened just a fraction. That is not what this is. Then what is it? I challenged. He held my gaze, steady, certain. This is me refusing to watch someone be disrespected in a place I own. The words hit differently. I blinked, processing. You own this place? He nodded once. Everything in my chest shifted again, pieces rearranging into something that made more sense and somehow less at the same time. So this is about business, I said, trying to ground it, trying to make it simple. About standards. No, he said quietly. It stopped being about business the moment you walked away like it was normal. My throat tightened, because it had felt normal. That was the problem. I looked down at the card again. My name was not on it. Nothing personal. Just a number. Clean. Minimal. Final. What happens if I take it? I asked, barely above a whisper. He did not hesitate. Then things change. And if I do not? His answer came just as easily. Then nothing does. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Heavier. Sharper. Like a decision was sitting between us, waiting. I stared at the card, then at him, then back at the card. My fingers twitched slightly at my side. I did not move. Not yet. Because for the first time in a long time, I realized something I had not allowed myself to think before. Maybe nothing was not as safe as I thought it was. I did not pick up the card. Not immediately. It sat there between us, small and quiet, like it did not understand the weight it carried, like it did not realize it was asking me to choose between the life I knew and something I could not see yet. My fingers hovered for a second, then dropped back to my side. I need time, I said, my voice steadier now, like saying it out loud gave me something solid to stand on. He did not argue. He did not push. He just nodded once, like he had expected that answer before I even spoke it. Then take it, he said. Time does not exist if you leave it behind. I frowned slightly at that, not fully understanding, but something about it stayed with me. I stepped forward, slowly, like the air had thickened, like each inch mattered more than it should. My fingers brushed the edge of the card. For a moment, I thought I might pull away again, but I did not. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have. This does not change anything, I said quickly, almost defensive. It just gives me an option. He watched me, that same steady gaze, but there was something different now. Not approval. Not relief. Recognition. Options change everything, he said quietly. I slipped the card into my pocket before I could think about it too much, before I could second-guess the decision I had not fully made yet. The room felt quieter after that. Or maybe I just noticed it more. What happens now? I asked, glancing toward the door, toward the world I had almost stepped back into. He followed my gaze, then looked back at me. Now, he said, you do not go back out there like nothing happened. I crossed my arms again, instinctive, protective. I still need to get home. You will, he replied. But not like that. Before I could ask what he meant, he reached for his phone, tapped once, then lowered it again. Simple. Efficient. Like everything he did. Someone will take you, he added. I shook my head immediately. No. I can take the bus. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened just enough to make the point clear without raising his voice. You will not be standing in the rain waiting for a bus tonight. It was not force. It was certainty. And for some reason, that unsettled me more. I do not need. I started. I know, he cut in, calm but firm. That does not change what is happening. Silence again. But this time, it felt less like pressure and more like space. Space I was not used to having. Space to think. To feel. To notice the way my hands were still slightly shaking. The way my chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something I could not name yet. Why me? I asked suddenly. The question slipped out before I could stop it. He did not answer right away. He looked at me like he was deciding how much to say, like the truth had layers, and he was choosing which one to give me. Because you stayed, he said finally. I blinked. Stayed. Most people leave before they are told to, he continued. You waited. Even when you knew how it would end. I looked down, my fingers brushing the edge of the card in my pocket without realizing it. That is not strength, I said quietly. That is necessity. It is both, he replied. I let that sit for a second, not fully agreeing, but not rejecting it either. Footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere behind us, controlled, quiet, professional. I turned slightly, instinctively alert, but he did not move. Did not react. Like he had expected it. A man in a dark suit stopped a few feet away, waiting, not speaking until Sebastian gave the smallest nod. The car is ready, he said. Simple. Direct. I felt that shift again. The reminder that his world did not pause. It adjusted. It responded. It moved around him. I stepped back slightly, instinct pulling me away from something that felt too big, too structured, too far from anything I had known. I can walk, I said again, softer this time, less resistance, more habit. Sebastian looked at me, not annoyed, not impatient. Just certain. You could, he said. But you will not. There it was again. Not control. Not exactly. But something close enough to make me uneasy. You do not get to decide that, I said, meeting his gaze, holding it this time. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a small shift in his expression. Not a smile. Something more subtle. Respect. No, he said. You do. He stepped back slightly, creating space between us for the first time since I had walked inside. And you are choosing not to argue anymore. I opened my mouth to respond. Closed it again. Because he was right. I was tired. Not just physically. Tired of pushing against things that never moved. Tired of pretending I had control over situations that were decided long before I walked into them. This felt different. Not easier. Just different. I exhaled slowly. Fine, I said. It was not surrender. It was acceptance. Of this moment. Of this shift. Of the fact that tonight was not going to end the way it started. He nodded once, like that was all he needed. No victory. No reaction. Just acknowledgement. We walked toward the door together, not side by side exactly, but close enough that I could feel the difference in pace, in presence, in everything. The rain had slowed outside, softer now, like the city was catching its breath. A black car waited at the curb, engine running, lights low, almost blending into the night. The man by the door opened it without a word. I hesitated for half a second, just enough to feel it. The line I was about to cross. Not physical. Not really. Something else. Something quieter. Something that did not announce itself until it was already happening. I glanced back once. At the empty room. At the place that had felt so important an hour ago. It looked smaller now. Less significant. Like it had already let go of me. Go, Sebastian said, not pushing, just allowing. I stepped into the car. The door closed behind me with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have. Through the tinted window, I saw him still standing there, exactly where I left him, like he had not moved at all. Watching, not to control, not to follow, just to make sure. The car pulled away slowly, merging into the quiet street, the city stretching out ahead of me in a way it never had before. I leaned back against the seat, my fingers pressing lightly against the card in my pocket, feeling its edges, its presence, its possibility. For the first time in a long time, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. Nothing had changed yet. And somehow, everything already had. The city always looks different through tinted glass. Softer, quieter, like it is hiding something. I sat in the back seat with my hands folded too tightly in my lap, watching the streetlights blur into long streaks of gold as the car moved through downtown. And for the first time, I was not planning my next shift or calculating how many hours I needed to cover rent. I was thinking about a question I could not answer. What happens when someone refuses to let you be invisible? The driver did not speak. Not once. Not even when we stopped at a red light that seemed to last longer than it should have. Everything about this felt controlled. Intentional. Even the silence. I shifted slightly in my seat, my fingers brushing the edge of the card again, like I needed to remind myself it was real, that tonight had actually happened. Because part of me still felt like I had imagined it. The way the room emptied. The way everyone listened. The way he looked at me like I was not something to ignore. That part felt the most unreal. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter street, the buildings smaller, older, more familiar. My neighborhood. The place where everything made sense again. Or at least used to. The car stopped in front of my building, the engine humming softly like it was waiting for something. I hesitated before opening the door, just for a second, like stepping out would snap everything back into place, like the version of me from an hour ago would be waiting on the sidewalk, wet and quiet and used to being dismissed. The driver stepped out first, walking around to open my door before I could reach for the handle. "We are here," he said, his voice polite, neutral, practiced. I nodded, stepping out into the cool air, the faint smell of rain still lingering on the pavement. My building looked the same as always. Peeling paint, flickering light above the entrance. Nothing about it had changed. And yet, it felt smaller. I turned slightly, looking back at the car. "Thank you," I said, because it felt like I should say something, even if I did not know exactly what I was thanking him for. He gave a short nod, and stepped back, already returning to his place like the moment was over before I could fully understand it. The door closed. The car pulled away. Just like that. No hesitation. No lingering. Like my part in his world had already ended for the night. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, staring at the empty street where the car had been, my chest tight with something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not exactly. Something closer to awareness. Of what I had just stepped into. And what I had just stepped away from. I pushed the door open and walked inside. The hallway dim and quiet. The faint hum of an old heater echoing somewhere behind the walls. Familiar. Safe. Small. My footsteps sounded louder than usual as I climbed the stairs, each step pulling me further away from the version of the night that still felt unreal. By the time I reached my door, my hand paused on the handle. Just for a second. Like I was about to enter something new instead of the same space I had been living in for months. I opened it anyway. The apartment greeted me exactly as I left it. A single lamp on in the corner. Dishes still in the sink. A folded jacket on the chair that I had meant to hang up 2 days ago. Nothing had changed. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it for a moment, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The quiet settled around me, heavy in a different way than before. Not empty, just aware. I walked slowly into the room, kicking off my shoes, the soft thud against the floor louder than it should have been. My reflection caught in the small mirror by the wall. I stopped. The makeup had worn off more than I thought. Faint lines where it had run. The truth underneath clearer now. I stepped closer. For a moment, I did not look away. I did not fix it. I just looked. At the person I had been trying to hide. At the version of me that he had seen in a second without hesitation. My fingers moved slowly, brushing against my wrist, pulling the sleeve back just enough to reveal what I had covered earlier. It looked smaller now. Or maybe I just saw it differently. Not something to hide. Something that had been noticed. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. I dropped my arm, stepping back, shaking my head slightly like I could clear it. like I could return to the version of myself that did not think this way. It did not work. I moved to the counter, pouring a glass of water, the sound of it filling the silence in a way that felt grounding, real. I took a sip, then another, trying to steady something inside me that refused to settle. My phone buzzed suddenly on the table. I froze. For a second, my mind went somewhere I did not want it to go. But when I looked, it was just a message. Work group chat. Short. Casual. Shift canceled tonight. Management issue. Will update. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Management issue. That was one way to say it. I let out a breath that felt almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Just clarity. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers moving almost automatically to my pocket. The card. I pulled it out, turning it over in my hand, the clean surface catching the light from the lamp. No name. Just a number. Simple. Direct. Certain. My thumb traced the edge of it. Once. Twice. Like I was trying to feel something from it, like it might tell me what to do next. It did not. It just stayed there. Quiet. Waiting. I moved to the couch and sat down, the weight of the night settling in a way that finally caught up to me. Everything felt different. Not because something had been taken from me, because something had been given. A choice. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the card still in my hand, my thoughts moving slower now, more deliberate. I could ignore it. Pretend tonight was an exception. Go back to what I knew, to what I understood, to what I could control. Or, I could not. My fingers tightened slightly around the card. Because for the first time, that second option did not feel impossible. It felt necessary. I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to feel the weight of that realization settle in fully. Then I opened them again. The room looked the same, but I did not. And somewhere in the back of my mind, quiet but certain, a thought took shape that I could not ignore anymore. Tomorrow, I was going to call that number. Morning light does not ask permission. It just comes in, quiet and honest, revealing everything you tried to ignore the night before. I woke up before my alarm, staring at the ceiling like I had not slept at all, even though I must have at some point because the sky outside my window had shifted from dark to pale gray. The card was still in my hand. I had fallen asleep holding it without realizing. My fingers were slightly curled around it, like even in sleep I had not wanted to let it go. That should have meant something. I sat up slowly, the room still quiet, the world outside not fully awake yet, and for a second, I just listened. The hum of the heater. A car passing 2 blocks away. My own breathing, steady but different. Like something inside me had already decided what today was going to be before I caught up to it. I looked down at the card again. Same as last night. Simple. No explanation. No instructions. Just a number. I ran my thumb over the edge once, then pushed myself up from the couch before I could think too much about it. Because thinking too much was how I had stayed stuck for so long. I moved through my apartment on instinct. Shower. Clothes. Coffee that tasted like nothing because my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every step felt sharper, more intentional, like I was aware of myself in a way I had not been before. Even the mirror felt different. I stopped in front of it, looking at my reflection without reaching for makeup right away. That was new. I studied my face, the faint shadows, the parts one usually corrected before anyone else could see them. My hand hovered near the counter where my makeup bag sat, then dropped. Not today. I grabbed my jacket instead, slipping it on, my fingers brushing against the card again in my pocket. Still there. Still waiting. It is just a phone call, I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice grounding me slightly. That is all. But it did not feel like just anything. It felt like a line, and I was already standing too close to it. The city was louder by the time I stepped outside. Morning traffic building. People moving fast, focused, already inside their routines. I blended into it automatically, my steps matching the rhythm of everyone around me, but my mind stayed somewhere else. On a quiet room. On a steady voice. On a question that had not left me since last night. Why do you let them? I reached the corner coffee shop I usually stopped at, but I did not go in. That routine felt too small now. Too predictable. Instead, I kept walking, my hand slipping into my pocket, fingers wrapping around the card like it could anchor me to something I had not stepped into yet. I stopped outside my building again. Same spot where the car had been. It looked ordinary now, like nothing had happened there at all. I pulled the card out slowly, holding it up, staring at the number like it might change if I looked at it long enough. It did not. My heart picked up slightly, faster than it should have been for something so simple. It is just a call. I repeated it again in my head, but the words felt thinner this time. Because I knew better. Calls like this did not stay small. I took out my phone. My fingers hesitated over the screen, hovering just above the keypad. Then I stopped, closed my eyes for a second, breathed in, breathed out, and pressed the numbers. Each one deliberate. Each one louder in my head than it should have been. The line rang once. Twice. On the third ring, it picked up. Silence. Not empty. Waiting. Then his voice. You called. No greeting. No surprise. Just certainty. Like he had known I would. My throat tightened slightly, and I hated that it did. I said I might. I replied, trying to keep my voice even. There was the faintest pause on the other end, like he was acknowledging the difference without pointing it out. And you decided you would, he said. I leaned back slightly against the wall, grounding myself in something solid. I have questions. Good, he answered immediately. So do I. That caught me off guard. About what? I asked. About how long you were going to stay in a place that treated you like you did not exist, he said, his tone unchanged, like he was stating a fact instead of asking a question. I exhaled slowly, looking out at the street, watching people pass by like this conversation was not happening just a few inches from my ear. I left, I said. That is a start, he replied. Not the same as a decision. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. You do not know anything about my life? I said, a little sharper than I meant to. Then tell me, he said simply. No pressure. No demand. Just open. That unsettled me more than anything else. I stayed quiet for a second too long. Then changed direction. What happens if I meet you? I asked. Direct. Clear. Easier than explaining things I had spent years avoiding. Another brief pause. Then we talk. I frowned slightly. That is it. That is enough, he said. I let that sit for a second, my mind trying to find the hidden meaning, the catch, the part one was missing. And if I decide not to? I added. Then you hang up, he said. And nothing changes. There it was again. That line. Simple. Clear. Unavoidable. My chest tightened slightly, but this time, it was not from fear. It was from understanding. I had already crossed part of it just by making this call. Where? I asked quietly. No hesitation. Same place, he said. 1 hour. My eyes widened slightly. That is not a lot of time. You already made the decision, he replied. The rest is just catching up. Silence. Just for a second. Then I nodded, even though he could not see it. Okay, I said. Okay, he echoed. And for the first time, there was something under his voice. Not control. Not expectation. Something closer to anticipation. The line went quiet. Then disconnected. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at it like it had just confirmed something I had been avoiding for a long time. The city moved around me like nothing had changed. Cars passing. People talking. Life continuing exactly as it always had. But inside me, something had shifted again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just certain. I looked down at the card one more time before slipping it back into my pocket. Then I pushed away from the wall and started walking. Not back inside. Not back to what I knew. Forward. Towards something I still did not fully understand. But for the first time, I was not trying to stop myself. I knew I was early. The clock on my phone said I still had 12 minutes. But I was already standing across the street, staring at the entrance like it might change if I waited long enough. It did not. The same glass doors. The same polished metal frame. But it did not feel like the same place anymore. Not after last night. Not after the way everything had shifted in a matter of minutes. I adjusted my jacket slightly, my fingers brushing over the fabric like I needed to remind myself I was still grounded, still in control of something. People moved past me without noticing, their footsteps quick, purposeful, their lives already in motion. I stayed still, watching, waiting, breathing slower than I felt. You can still leave. The thought came quietly, not as fear, as fact. I could turn around right now, walk back into the version of my life that made sense. That was predictable. That did not ask anything more from me than survival. My foot shifted slightly, just enough to test the idea. I did not move, because another thought followed, just as quiet, and just as certain. You will regret it if you do. I exhaled slowly, lifting my chin, my eyes locking onto the door again. Then I crossed the street. Each step felt louder than it should have, like the city had gone quiet just to hear it. By the time I reached the entrance, my hand paused on the handle for half a second. Not hesitation. Recognition. This was the moment. Then I pushed it open. The air inside felt different. Still controlled. Still polished. But not distant anymore. Not unreachable. The space was quieter than I expected. No crowd. No noise. Just low lighting and the faint sound of something soft playing in the background. He was already there. Of course he was. Sitting at the same table as last night, like he had not moved, like time had adjusted around him instead of the other way around. His posture was the same. Relaxed. Controlled. A glass of water in front of him, untouched. His eyes lifted the second I stepped inside. Not delayed. Not searching. Direct. Like he had been waiting for that exact moment. "You are early," he said. Not surprised. Just noting it. I walked closer, my steps measured, aware of every inch between us. "So are you," I replied. A small pause. Then, the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "I am never late," he said. I stopped across from him, not sitting yet, not fully stepping into his space. "Neither am I," I said, even though we both knew that was not entirely true. His gaze held mine for a second longer, like he was deciding something again, like he always was. Then he gestured lightly to the chair across from him. "Sit." Not a command, but close enough to one that my body reacted before my mind caught up. I sat. The chair felt different than I remembered. Or maybe I did. The table between us was the same distance as before, but it did not feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a line, one I had already crossed. Silence settled for a moment. Not awkward, just intentional. He did not rush to fill it. Neither did I. "You did not cover it today," he said finally, his eyes dropping briefly to my wrist again. I followed his gaze instinctively. My sleeve had shifted slightly, exposing more than I had planned. "I did not fix it this time." "No," I said. His eyes lifted back to mine. "Why?" I held his gaze, steady this time, not looking away. "Because you already saw it," I answered. Something changed in his expression. Subtle, but there. Approval was not the word. Respect was closer. "Good," he said quietly. That one word landed heavier than it should have. Not because of what it meant. Because of how it felt. Like I had passed something I did not know I was being tested on. I leaned back slightly in the chair, grounding myself again. "You said we would talk," I said. "So talk." He nodded once, like he had been waiting for that. "What do you want?" he asked. The question came fast. Direct. No softening. No build-up. I blinked, caught off guard. "That is your opening question?" I asked. "It is the only one that matters," he replied. I exhaled slowly, my fingers resting lightly on the table, tapping once without realizing it. I started then stopped. Because the answer was not simple. Not one word. Not one thing. I looked down for a second, then back at him. "I want to stop feeling like I have to shrink to fit into places that do not want me," I said finally. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Then stop," he said. I almost laughed. "That is not how it works." "It is exactly how it works," he replied, calm, certain. "You decide what you accept. Everything else follows." I shook my head slightly. "You say that like the world listens." "It does not," he said. "But I do." The words landed differently. Quieter, but deeper. I stilled slightly, my breath catching just enough to notice. "And that changes what?" I asked. He leaned back slightly, his posture still relaxed, still controlled. "It changes what happens next," he said. Silence again. But this time, it felt like something was building inside it. Something not yet said. Something waiting. I studied him for a moment, really looked this time, not just at the surface, not just at the presence he carried. There was something else there. Something harder to define. "Why?" I asked again. "Why do you care?" He did not answer right away. His gaze held mine, steady, unflinching, like he was deciding how much truth I was ready for. "Because I recognize something," he said finally. My brow furrowed slightly. "What?" His eyes did not move. "Someone who learned to survive in a world that did not make space for them," he said. A pause. Then, quieter. "And forgot they were allowed to take it." My chest tightened. Not from fear. From something else. Something sharper. Something real. I looked away first this time, my fingers pressing lightly against the table, grounding myself in something physical. "You do not know me," I said, but the words felt weaker now. Less certain. "Not yet," he replied. "Not yet." The words echoed in my mind longer than they should have, because they did not sound like a possibility. They sounded like a plan. I lifted my gaze back to his, something shifting inside me again, something I was starting to recognize but not fully understand yet. So what happens now? I asked quietly. He held my gaze for a second, then said, "Now you decide if you are ready to stop asking for permission." Silence fell again. But this time, it was not empty. It was waiting. And for the first time, I realized it was waiting on me. There is a moment when silence stops being comfortable and starts demanding an answer. I felt it sitting there between us, stretching just long enough to become something real, something I could not ignore or step around. My fingers rested against the edge of the table, still, but not relaxed, like my body was waiting for my mind to catch up. Stop asking for permission. The words stayed with me, louder now, clearer. I let out a slow breath, my eyes dropping for just a second before lifting back to his. "And if I do not know how," I said quietly. He did not hesitate. "Then you learn." Simple. Too simple. I frowned slightly. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters," he replied, his tone unchanged, steady, like he had said this before, like he had watched people stand exactly where I was standing now. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms without thinking, a reflex I was starting to recognize more than I liked. "You make it sound like it is easy." "I did not say it was easy," he said. "I said it was necessary." That word settled heavier. Necessary. Not optional. Not convenient. Required. I looked away for a second, my gaze drifting toward the window, watching the city move outside like none of this existed. People walking. Cars passing. Lives continuing without pause. "And what happens if I try?" I asked slowly. "And nothing changes." His answer came just as calm. "Then you try again." I let out a quiet breath, something between frustration and disbelief. "That is not how the world works." "It is not how your world has worked," he corrected. I turned back to him, my eyes narrowing slightly. "There is a difference." A small pause. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said. "There is." The way he said it made something shift again. Not resistance. Something closer to curiosity. Dangerous in its own way. "Show me," I said suddenly. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could soften them or take them back. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened just enough to acknowledge the shift. "Show you what?" he asked. "What you mean," I replied. "About not asking for permission. About things changing." Silence followed. Not long. Just enough. Then he leaned forward slightly, his hands resting lightly on the table, his attention fully on me in a way that made everything else fade for a second. "Stand up," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Stand up," he repeated, calm, certain. I hesitated, because this felt like something. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in between that carried weight without raising its voice. My fingers pressed lightly against the table as I pushed myself up from the chair. Slowly. Deliberately. He watched me the entire time, not moving, not speaking, just observing. Once I was standing, I looked down at him, unsure what came next, aware of every inch of space between us. "Now what?" I asked. He stood. Smooth. Effortless. In a second, the dynamic shifted. Not because of height. Because of presence. Because of certainty. He stepped around the table, closing the distance between us, but not too close. Never too close. Just enough to make sure I could not ignore him. "Walk with me," he said. I followed. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to see where this was going. We moved through the room slowly, the sound of our footsteps soft against the polished floor, the space still empty, still quiet, like it was waiting for something to happen. He stopped near the center of the room, turning to face me again. "Last night," he said, "you stood outside that door." I nodded slightly. "Yes." "And you waited," he continued, "even when you knew how it would end." My chest tightened just a little. "I needed the job." "You needed the opportunity," he corrected. "Not the treatment." I held his gaze, something in me pushing back, even now. That is easy to say when you are not the one who has to deal with the consequences. He studied me for a second, then took a step to the side, gesturing lightly toward the entrance. "Go to the door," he said. I hesitated again, then walked. Each step measured, aware, like I was stepping back into a version of last night, but this time with him watching. I stopped at the door, my hand hovering near the handle. "Now what?" I asked. His voice came from behind me, steady, clear. "Open it." I frowned slightly but did it anyway, pushing the door open, letting the light from outside spill in, the sound of the city filtering through again. Step outside, he said. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the air cooler than inside, the world louder, more chaotic, more real. He followed, stopping just behind me. Now, he said, walk back in. I turned slightly, confused. What? Walk back in, he repeated. I stared at him for a second, trying to understand what he was asking, what this meant. Then I turned and walked back through the door. This time, I did not hesitate, did not pause, did not look for permission. I just walked, straight in, straight past the threshold that had stopped me before. I turned back to him, something shifting inside me before I could name it. That is it? I asked. He stepped inside again, the door closing softly behind him. No, he said. That is the beginning. My breath slowed slightly, my chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt different now. What changed? I asked. His eyes held mine, steady, certain. You did, he said. I opened my mouth to argue, to say it was not that simple, that it was not enough. But the words did not come, because something in me knew. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. I had not waited. I had not asked. I had not shrunk. I had just walked. That is how it starts, he added quietly. Not with permission, with decision. Silence settled again, but this time, it felt lighter. Not empty, not heavy, just open, like something had shifted just enough to make space for something else to grow. I looked at him, really looked, my mind catching up to something my instincts had already recognized. And what happens next? I asked, softer now, but clearer. He did not look away. That depends, he said, on whether you are ready to keep walking. There is a difference between taking a step and choosing a direction. I felt at the moment he said it, the weight of it settling somewhere deeper than the movement we had just made, like walking through that door had been the smallest part of something much bigger. I stood there, just inside the entrance, the sound of the city still faint behind me, my mind catching up to a reality I had not fully accepted yet. Keep walking where? I asked, my voice quieter now but clearer, like I was finally asking the right question. He watched me for a second, not answering immediately, like he was measuring the space between what I was asking and what I was ready to hear. Then he stepped closer again, not invading, not pushing, just closing the distance enough to keep me present. With me, he said. Simple, direct, unavoidable. My chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. Because that was the part one had not said out loud yet. I looked at him, really looked, searching for something that would make this easier to define, easier to accept or reject. But there was nothing simple about him. Nothing easy. Just certainty. And something else I was starting to understand. Intention. That is not a small step. I said, my voice steady, but my thoughts moving faster underneath. He nodded once. No, he agreed. It is not. Silence stretched for a moment, but it did not feel heavy this time. It felt like space. Like room to decide. I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing lightly against my sleeve again, not to hide anything, just to feel something familiar. And what does that mean? I asked. Walking with you. He did not look away. It means you stop standing outside rooms that are already yours, he said. It means you stop accepting less than what you have already earned. A pause. Then, softer. It means you stop being invisible when you were never meant to be. The words settled into me in a way that felt different from everything else he had said. Not sharper, not heavier, just clearer. I looked down for a second, my breath steadying, my mind sorting through something I had not allowed myself to think about before. Then I looked back up. And what do you get out of it? I asked. Because that mattered. It had to. Nothing in my life had ever come without a cost. His expression did not shift, but there was something in his eyes now that felt more defined. I do not invest in things that do not matter, he said. I frowned slightly. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need right now, he replied. I held his gaze, trying to read between the lines, trying to find the part he was not saying. But there was nothing hidden in his tone. Just restraint. Like he was choosing what to give me, piece by piece. You are asking me to trust you, I said. No, he corrected immediately. I am asking you to trust yourself enough to stop saying no to what you already want. That hit differently, because it was not about him anymore. It was about me. And I did not have an easy answer for that. I turned slightly, walking a few steps away from him, needing space to think, to breathe, to feel where I actually stood in this moment. The room felt larger now. Or maybe I did. I stopped near one of the tables, my fingers brushing lightly against the surface, grounding myself in something real. You think this is what I want? I said, not turning around yet. I know it is, he answered. No hesitation. No doubt. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders rising and falling as I processed that. You do not know me well enough to know that, I said. Not yet, he replied again. That phrase. It was starting to mean something. I turned back to face him, my expression more focused now, less defensive, more honest. Then why are you so sure? I asked. He stepped forward slightly, closing part of the distance again, his gaze steady, unbroken. Because you showed up, he said. A pause. And people who are not ready do not. That settled into me in a way I could not ignore. Because he was right. I could have walked away. I almost had. More than once. But I did not. I was still here. Showing up is not the same as knowing what comes next, I said quietly. It is enough, he replied. I studied him for a second longer, something shifting again, something I was starting to recognize as something close to belief. Not in him. Not yet. In something else. In myself. And that felt unfamiliar. Dangerous. Necessary. I straightened slightly, my posture changing without me forcing it, like my body had already made a decision my mind was still catching up to. If I say yes, I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. This does not mean I give up control. His response came immediately. It means you take it. That answer settled everything. Not because it removed the uncertainty, because it reframed it. I nodded once, more to myself then. To him, my breath steady now, my thoughts clearer. Then I am not walking behind you. I added, my voice firmer. I am not walking in your shadow. A small pause. Then, the faintest shift in his expression again. This time, it was unmistakable. Respect. You will not, he said. I held his gaze, letting that settle between us, not as a challenge, not as a warning, just as truth. Then I took a step forward. Not toward the door. Not away. Toward him. The space between us closed, but it did not feel like distance anymore. It felt like alignment. Then I will keep walking, I said quietly. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just certain. His eyes held mine for a second longer, like he was confirming something, like he had been waiting for that exact moment. Then he nodded once. Final. Good, he said. And for the first time, the word did not feel like approval. It felt like recognition. I did not know exactly what came next. I did not know how much would change or how fast or what it would cost. But for the first time, I was not trying to predict it. I was not trying to control it before it happened. I was just stepping into it. And somehow, that felt like more power than I had ever had before. The moment you say yes to something that can change you, the world does not shift all at once. It waits. Quiet. Watching what you will do next. I stood there in front of him, the space between us no longer uncertain, no longer fragile, but not fully defined either. It felt like standing at the edge of something that did not announce itself with noise or drama, just a quiet understanding that nothing behind me would feel the same again. He did not move immediately. Neither did I. The silence between us was no longer something to fill. It was something to hold. Then we do not waste time, he said finally, his voice steady, grounded, like the decision had already been accepted as fact. I nodded once, my shoulders settling into a posture that felt new, but not unfamiliar, like I had been carrying it somewhere inside me without using it. What does that look like? I asked. Starting now. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the far side of the room, where a smaller section sat partially separated from the rest of the space, more private, more intentional. It looks like you stop thinking like someone who is waiting to be allowed, he said, and start thinking like someone who belongs before anyone else decides it. I followed him without hesitation this time, my steps even, my attention sharper, aware of every detail in a way I had not been before. The room did not intimidate me anymore. It felt adjustable, like it responded to presence instead of status. We reached the smaller section, and he pulled out a chair, not as a gesture of control, but something more measured, more deliberate. I sat, this time without second-guessing. He sat across from me again, the distance between us familiar now, but different in what it carried. First, he said, you stop going back to places that already showed you what they think of you. My mind immediately went to the message from this morning. Shift canceled. Management issue. I exhaled slowly. That part already started, I said. His gaze held mine. Good, he replied. Then we moved forward, not backward. I nodded slightly, my fingers resting lightly against the table, not tense anymore, just present. And forward means what exactly? I asked. Because I am not walking into something blind. You are not, he said calmly. You are walking into something you will understand as we build it. That word again. Build. Not take. Not force. Build. I studied him for a moment, weighing the difference, letting it settle into something that made sense. So you are not offering me a job? I said. No, he replied. I am offering you a position that did not exist before you walked in. That caught me off guard. That sounds like a risk, I said. It is, he answered. For both of us. That honesty landed differently. No exaggeration. No promises. Just fact. I leaned back slightly, my mind shifting into something more focused, more analytical. Then I need to understand the terms, I said. A small pause. Then a nod. Good, he said. You are already thinking differently. I did not react to that. I just held his gaze, steady. Explain it, I said. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting lightly on the table again, his attention fully locked on me. You have something most people in this room do not. He said. Perspective. I frowned slightly. That is not something people usually pay for. They do not know how to, he replied. I do. Silence followed, but it felt different now. More like a space for understanding than a gap to fill. You see things they do not, he continued. Because you have been on the other side of their decisions. I felt that settle in my chest, not as something new, but something I had never framed that way before. And you think that is valuable here? I said. I know it is, he answered. I looked down for a second, my fingers brushing lightly against the table, grounding myself again. Then I looked back up. And what does that look like in practice? I asked. Because I am not here to be a symbol. His response was immediate. You are here to be a voice. That landed. Clear. Direct. A voice in what? I pressed. In decisions that affect people who do not get to sit at this table, he said. A pause. Until now. My breath slowed slightly, my mind processing that, mapping it against everything I had experienced, everything I had accepted as normal. And you think they will listen? I said. They will, he replied. Because I do. There it was again. That quiet certainty. Not loud. Not forceful. Just undeniable. I studied him for a second longer, something shifting again, something that felt less like resistance and more like alignment. And if I disagree with you, I said. Then you say it, he answered. No hesitation. That is the point. I let out a slow breath, something inside me settling into place, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to recognize that this was real. This was happening. You are asking me to step into a world that was not built for me, I said quietly. No, he corrected. I am asking you to help rebuild it. Silence followed again. But this time, it was not heavy. It was open, like a door that had not been there before. I sat there for a second longer, letting everything settle, letting the weight of it find its place inside me without overwhelming it. Then I nodded once. Not because I understood everything. Because I understood enough. Then I am not here to fit in, I said. His eyes held mine, steady. No, he said. You are. Here to change what fitting in means. That was it. That was the shift. I felt it fully this time. Not just a step. Not just a decision. A direction. I straightened slightly, my posture aligning with something that felt more natural than anything I had forced before. Then we do not waste time, I said, echoing his words from earlier, but this time they felt like mine. A small pause. Then he nodded once. Good, he said again. And this time, it did not feel like recognition. It felt like agreement. And for the first time, I was not stepping into something unknown alone. I was stepping into something that was waiting for me to claim it. Power does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up as a seat at the table you were never meant to reach. I sat there across from him, the words still settling into place inside me, not as something overwhelming, but as something precise, something that demanded clarity instead of fear. The room felt different again, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. The distance between where I was and where I could go no longer felt impossible. It felt measurable. Then we start now, I said, my voice steady, more certain than it had been at any point before this. He nodded once, like that was the only response needed. We already have, he replied. A quiet pause followed, but it did not feel like waiting anymore. It felt like movement, like something had already begun to take shape the moment I chose not to step back. You said I would be a voice, I continued. Then I need to understand where that voice matters first. He leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving mine, but his posture shifting just enough to signal a transition from conversation to action. "There is a meeting this afternoon," he said. "Private. Limited attendance." My attention sharpened immediately. "About what?" I asked. "Expansion," he replied. "New locations. New partnerships. Decisions that will be made quickly and carried out faster." I nodded slightly, processing. "And you want me there?" It was not a question. "I do," he confirmed. My fingers pressed lightly against the table, grounding myself again, but this time it was not to steady uncertainty. It was to organize intention. "Then I am not there to observe," I said. "No," he replied. "You are there to speak." That landed clearly. No room for interpretation. I held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. "Then I need context," I said. "I am not walking into a room like that unprepared." A small shift in his expression again. Approval, but quieter this time. "Good," he said. "You are already thinking like you belong there." I did not react to that. Not outwardly. But something in me registered it. Not as validation. As alignment. He reached for a folder that had been placed neatly at the edge of the table, sliding it toward me without ceremony. "Start here," he said. I opened it slowly, my eyes scanning the pages, details, locations, projections, numbers that felt both familiar and completely new depending on how I looked at them. But what stood out was not the data. It was the pattern. The way decisions were framed. The way people were reduced to outcomes without being considered as individuals. I felt it immediately. The gap. The absence. I looked up. "There is no consideration for accessibility," I said. "Or community integration." His eyes sharpened slightly. "Explain." I tapped lightly on one of the pages. "You are placing high-end locations in areas that cannot sustain them without displacement," I said. "You are designing for exclusivity, not sustainability." Silence. But not empty. Focused. He watched me carefully, not interrupting, not redirecting. "And that creates a short-term gain with long-term instability," I added. "You are building something that will reject the very environment it depends on." I leaned back slightly, letting the words settle, letting the analysis stand on its own without pushing it further. "That is what they are going to approve," I finished. He nodded once, slow. "Yes," he said. "It is." A pause. "Then, what would you change?" There it was. Not a test. Not a trap. An opening. I looked back down at the folder, my mind moving quickly now, not hesitating, not second-guessing. "You redesign the entry points," I said. "You create layered access instead of a single barrier. You allow the surrounding community to interact with the space without being excluded from it." I flipped a page, pointing again. "You invest in the environment first, not just the structure. That builds loyalty, stability, long-term value." I looked up again, my voice steady, clear. "You do not just build something impressive. You build something that lasts." Silence followed. But it felt different now. Not waiting. Not uncertain. Just acknowledged. He studied me for a moment longer than before, something in his gaze more focused, more precise. "And you think they will accept that?" he asked. I held his gaze without hesitation. "If you do," I said. Another pause. Then, the smallest shift in his expression. Not approval. Not surprise. Something deeper. Decision. "Then that is what we present," he said. Just like that. No debate. No hesitation. The weight of that hit differently. Not because he agreed. Because he acted. Immediately. I felt it in my chest, a quiet realization that this was not theoretical. This was real. My voice did not just exist here. It carried. "You did not argue," I said, more to understand than to challenge. "You were not wrong," he replied simply. That answer settled everything. Not because it was easy, because it was clear. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers resting on top of it for a second before I pulled them back. "Then I will be ready," I said. "You already are," he answered. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "I am becoming ready." A small pause. Then he nodded once. "That is the difference," he said. We stood at the same time, not planned, not forced, just aligned in the moment. The room around us felt sharper now, more defined, like it had shifted from a place of conversation to a place of movement. "The meeting is in 2 hours," he said. "We leave in 1. I nodded. "Then I will not be late," I replied. His gaze held mine for a second longer, something steady, something confirming. "I know," he said. And for the first time, I believed him. Not because of him. Because of me. I turned slightly, stepping away from the table, the folder still in my mind, the weight of what was coming next settling into something that felt less like pressure and more like purpose. The door ahead did not feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a direction. And this time, I was not walking through it to survive. I was walking through it to change what happened on the other side. Confidence does not announce itself. It shows up in the way you walk into a room that was not built for you and refuse to adjust your steps. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the air as we entered the building, the quiet way conversations lowered just enough to acknowledge presence without making it obvious. The elevator ride was silent, but not empty. I stood beside him, not behind, not trailing, just there. My reflection in the polished steel doors looked different. Not because of what I wore, because of how I held myself. Shoulders back, chin level, eyes steady. I did not recognize that version of me fully yet, but I did not look away from her either. The doors opened on the top floor, revealing a space that felt colder than the one we had just left. Not in temperature, in intention. This was where decisions were made. Quickly, without hesitation. A long table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by people who did not look surprised to see him, but definitely noticed me. That was the first test. The way their eyes moved. Not openly, subtly, measuring, calculating, trying to place me into a category that made sense to them. I did not give them one. We walked in together. No announcement. No introduction yet. Just presence. He took his seat at the head of the table like it was the only place he had ever sat. I took the chair beside him without waiting, without asking, without looking to see if it was allowed. That was the second test. No one stopped me, but I felt it. The shift. The question forming in the silence. Who is she? Good. Let them ask. A man across the table cleared his throat slightly, his voice controlled, but edged with something that sounded like curiosity wrapped in politeness. We were not expecting additional attendees, he said, his eyes flicking toward me, then back to Sebastian. Not rude. Not welcoming either. Just cautious. Sebastian did not look at him immediately. He opened the folder in front of him, calm, unhurried, like the question had already been answered before it was asked. You were expecting results, he said. She is part of that. Silence followed. Not long. Just enough to settle the statement into place. The man nodded slowly, like he was adjusting to something he had not planned for. Understood, he said, though his tone suggested he was still processing it. I did. Not speak. Not yet. I let the room breathe. Let them look. Let them wonder. Because this was not about proving anything immediately. This was about presence. The meeting began without ceremony. Numbers. Locations. Projections. The same language I had seen in the folder, but now spoken out loud, framed as decisions already leaning toward approval. I listened. Fully. Not reacting. Not interrupting. Just understanding. Patterns. Gaps. Assumptions. It was all there. The same blind spots. The same absence. The same focus on outcomes without considering impact. My fingers rested lightly against the table, not tense, just grounded, waiting for the right moment. It came faster than I expected. The proposed structure maximizes return within the first 12 months, another voice said, confident, certain, pointing to a projection on the screen. We anticipate minimal resistance. Minimal resistance. That phrase echoed in my mind. Not because of what it meant, because of what it ignored. I leaned forward slightly. Not abruptly. Just enough to shift the energy. Minimal resistance from who? I asked. The room stilled. Not dramatically. Just noticeably. The man speaking paused, his eyes moving to me, assessing, recalibrating. From the surrounding market, he replied. Vague. Controlled. I nodded once. That is not what I asked, I said. My voice was calm. Even. But it carried. I asked from who? A pause. Longer this time. I felt the attention shift more clearly now. Not dismissive anymore. Focused. The man adjusted slightly in his seat. From local stakeholders, he said. I tilted my head just slightly. Defined how? I asked. Silence. Not empty. Tension. The kind that builds when a question does not allow an easy answer. I did not rush. I did not fill it. I let it sit. Let them feel it. Because that was the point. Finally, he exhaled slightly, his tone less certain now. Primarily property owners and business partners, he said. I nodded again. Not the people who actually live there, I said. Not a question. A statement. The shift was immediate. Subtle, but real. A few glances exchanged across the table. Not agreement. Not yet. Awareness. I leaned back slightly, my posture still relaxed, still grounded. You are measuring resistance from those who benefit from the decision, I continued. Not from those who are affected by it. Silence again. But this time, it was heavier. More deliberate. I let it settle for a second. Before continuing. That is not minimal resistance, I said. That is unmeasured resistance. No one spoke immediately. I could feel it. The recalculation. The adjustment. The recognition that something had shifted in the conversation. I did not look at Sebastian right away. I did not need to. I could feel it. The stillness beside me. Not interruption. Not correction. Just presence. Support without control. Finally, the same man spoke again, his tone more careful now. And your suggestion would be, he asked. I met his gaze directly. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just steady. You redefine your metrics, I said. You include community impact as a primary factor, not an afterthought. I paused slightly, letting the words land. You do not measure success by how quickly something grows, I added. You measure it by how well it is sustained. Silence followed. But this time, it felt different. Not resistance. Consideration. Real. Present. I sat back slightly, my hands resting calmly on the table, my breath steady, my mind clear. I had spoken. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But fully. And the room had listened. For the first time, I felt it. Not just presence. Influence. I glanced at Sebastian then. Just once. His gaze was already on me. Not surprised. Not impressed. Just certain. Like this was exactly what he expected. Like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. And for the first time, I did not question that. The room does not forget the moment someone shifts the balance. It adjusts. Quietly. Carefully. I felt it in the way no one rushed to speak after I finished. In the way the air held just a little tighter, like the space itself was reconsidering what it had accepted as normal. My words did not echo. They stayed. That was the difference. The man across from me leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table, not impatient, just thinking. That alone told me something had changed. Before, I would have been dismissed, redirected, ignored. Now, I was being considered. That was power. Not loud. Not obvious. Real. Community impact introduces variables that are difficult to control. Another voice said from the far end of the table, measured, analytical, trying to regain structure. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. So does ignoring it, I replied. No edge. No push. Just fact. He held my gaze for a second. Longer than expected, then nodded once, slowly. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. That was enough. The conversation shifted after that. Not dramatically. Subtly. But I could hear it. The language changed. Words like access, sustainability, long-term presence started replacing speed, exclusivity, immediate return. It was not a full transformation, but it was movement. And movement meant something had taken hold. I stayed engaged, not dominating, not forcing, just present at the right moments, asking the questions that had not been asked before, reframing the assumptions that had gone unchallenged. Each time I spoke, the room adjusted a little more. Each time I stayed silent, it was intentional, not passive. That was new. And I could feel it. Not just in them. In me. At some point, the discussion circled back to the initial projections, now slightly altered, slightly more grounded. The same man from earlier looked toward Sebastian, then back at me. If we incorporate this approach, he said, choosing his words more carefully now, we will need to restructure timelines. I nodded slightly. Then you restructure timelines, I said. You do not compromise the foundation to meet a schedule. Silence followed again. But this time, it was shorter. Quicker. Less resistant. The shift was holding. Sebastian finally spoke then, his voice cutting through the room with quiet authority. We adjust, he said. No explanation. No justification. Just decision. That was the moment. I felt it. The point where everything we had said stopped being theory and became action. Heads nodded. Notes were made. The direction was set. And no one questioned it. Not because they were forced to. Because it made sense. That was the difference. I leaned back slightly, my shoulders relaxing for the first time since we entered the room, not from relief, but from recognition. I had not just been heard. I had been integrated. The meeting moved toward its conclusion, details being finalized, responsibilities assigned, timelines restructured to reflect the new approach. The energy in the room felt different now. Less rigid, more considered, not softer, smarter. When it ended, people stood slowly, conversations starting again, but quieter, more focused. A few glances came my way, not questioning anymore, measuring something else now. Value. I did not react. I did not acknowledge it outwardly. I just stood when Sebastian did, my posture aligned, my presence steady. We walked out the same way we walked in. Together. No announcement. No need. The elevator doors closed behind us, the noise of the room fading instantly, replaced by a silence that felt earned. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I had been holding that breath until now. My reflection in the elevator caught my eye again. Same face. Same person. But something had shifted in a way I could not undo even if I wanted to. You did not hesitate, he said beside me. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. I could not, I replied. Not once I saw it. He nodded once, like that answer confirmed something he already knew. Most people do, he said. Hesitate. I leaned back slightly against the wall of the elevator, my arms resting loosely at my sides. Most people are not invited to speak in rooms like that, I said. They are invited, he corrected. They just do not realize it. I frowned slightly. That is not the same thing. It is, he said. They wait for permission that is never coming. I let that sit for a second, my mind replaying the moment I spoke, the shift, the reaction, the outcome. He was right. No one had given me permission. I had taken space, and the room had adjusted. The doors opened again, returning us to the main floor, the world outside moving at its own pace, unaware of what had just changed above it. We stepped out, the energy different now, not because of him, not because of them, because of me. This is what you meant, I said quietly as we walked, my voice more thoughtful now. About not asking. Yes, he replied. I nodded slowly, my steps steady, my mind clear. And it worked, I added. He glanced at me briefly. It always does, he said. When it is real. We reached the entrance, the door ahead no longer something to pass through, but something I chose to walk through. I paused for just a second before stepping outside, not from hesitation, but from awareness. The city looked the same. The noise, the movement, the pace. Nothing had changed out there, but everything had changed in how I stood in it. I turned slightly toward him, my expression steady, grounded in something I understood now. So what happens next? I asked. He looked at me, his gaze calm, certain, like he had been waiting for that question all along. Now, he said, you decide how much of that you are willing to become. Silence followed, but it did not feel like a question. It felt like a mirror. And for the first time, I did not look away. There is a moment after everything changes where the world expects you to go back to who you were. I stood there on the sidewalk, the city moving around me like nothing had shifted, like the same rules still applied, like the same version of me was supposed to step back into place without question. But I could not. Not anymore. I felt it in the way my feet did not move automatically, in the way my shoulders stayed squared instead of folding inward, in the way my eyes stayed forward instead of dropping to avoid attention. I was still the same person, but I was no longer living the same way. I turned slightly, looking at him, not for direction, not for permission, but for clarity. How much? I asked quietly. How much of this changes everything? He did not answer immediately. His gaze held mine, steady, measured, like he was deciding how much truth to give me at once. Then, that depends, he said, on how much you are willing to stop returning to what no longer fits. I let that settle, the weight of it not heavy, just precise. Because I already knew the answer. I just had not said it out loud yet. I looked past him for a second, at the street, at the people walking by, at the version of life I had been part of just yesterday. It looked smaller now, not because it was less important, because I had outgrown it without realizing. Then I am done returning, I said. The words came out calm, clear, final. No hesitation. No need to soften them. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, something that felt like acknowledgement, like a line had just been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Good, he said quietly. And this time, it did not feel like approval or recognition. It felt like alignment with something larger than both of us. I exhaled slowly, my breath steady, my mind clear in a way it had not been before. This does not mean I will not question things, I added, my voice firm, grounded in something I understood now. It means you will question the right things, he replied. That landed exactly where it needed to. I nodded once, more to myself than to him, my thoughts no longer scattered, no longer defensive. Focused. Intentional. We stood there for a moment longer, not speaking, not needing to, the silence no longer something to fill, but something to stand inside without discomfort. Then I stepped forward. Not away, not past him, just forward, into the direction I had already chosen. He walked beside me without comment, matching my pace without adjusting it, not leading, not following, just there. That mattered more than I expected. We moved through the city like that, not hidden, not announced, just present, the rhythm of our steps steady against the noise of everything around us. I did not feel out of place anymore. I felt aware, of space, of presence, of what I allowed and what I did not. That was new, and it was not leaving. We reached the car without me noticing how far we had walked, the distance not measured in blocks or minutes, but in something internal, something that had shifted permanently. The door opened. I paused for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I recognized the moment. This was not just a ride, not just a next step. It was continuation. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze again, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging. This is not temporary, I said. No, he replied. It is not. That was enough. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with the same quiet finality as the night before, but this time, it did not feel like something ending. It felt like something beginning. The car moved smoothly into the flow of traffic, the city stretching out ahead of us, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting loosely in my lap, not tense, not guarded, just ready. My reflection in the window caught my eye again, the glass showing me a version of myself that felt more real than anything I had seen before. Not perfect, not finished, but no longer hidden. I let out a small breath, something close to a quiet laugh, but softer, more grounded. You knew, I said, glancing toward him, that I would not walk away. He did not look surprised. Yes, he said. I tilted, my head slightly. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because you did not look away when it mattered. I thought about that. About the moment at the door. The moment at the table. The moment I chose to speak instead of stay silent. He was right. It had never been about opportunity. It had been about whether I would take it. I looked forward again, the city lights reflecting softly across the glass, my thoughts no longer circling the past, no longer anchored to what had been. Moving forward. Then this is not about you, I said slowly. It never was, he replied. Silence followed. But it was different now. Not waiting. Not uncertain. Just understood. I nodded slightly, my posture settling into something that felt natural, something I did not have to think about anymore. Good, I said quietly. Because now I knew. This was not about being chosen. It was about choosing. And I already had. The car continued forward, the city opening up in front of us. Not as something I had to navigate carefully, but as something I was finally ready to step into fully. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like I was trying to be allowed in. I felt like I belonged before anyone else decided I did. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. But somehow, everything changed the moment I stopped asking for permission.